Part 7, Chapter 21 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. After an excellent dinner with Bartnyansky and considerable cognac, Stepan Arkadyevitch went to the Countess Lidia Ivanovna's a little later than the hour designated. "Who is with the countess? The Frenchman?" he asked of the Swiss, as he noticed beside Alexey Alexandrovitch's well-known overcoat a curious mantle with clasps. "Alexey Alexandrovitch Karenin and the Count Bezzubov," answered the servant stolidly. "Princess Myakaya was right," thought Oblonsky as he went upstairs. "Strange. It would be a good thing to cultivate the countess. She has great influence. If she would say a little word in my behalf to Pomorsky, it would be just the thing." It was still very light outdoors, but the blinds were drawn in the Countess Lidia Ivanovna's little drawing room, and the lamps were lighted. At a round table on which was a lamp, the countess and Alexey Alexandrovitch were sitting, engaged in a confidential talk. A short, lean, pale man, with knock-kneed legs and a feminine figure, with long hair falling over his coat collar, and handsome, glowing eyes, was examining the portraits on the wall at the other end of the room. Stepan Arkadyevitch, after having greeted the countess and Alexey Alexandrovitch, involuntarily turned round to look once more at this singular personage. "Monsieur Landau," said the countess, gently, and with a precaution which struck Oblonsky. The introduction was made. Landau hastily glanced around, and coming up, placed his moist, unresponsive hand in Oblonsky's, and immediately went back to look at the portraits. Lidia Ivanovna and Alexey Alexandrovitch exchanged significant glances. "I am very glad to see you today," said the countess to Stepan Arkadyevitch, motioning him to a chair. "You noticed," added she in a low voice, glancing at the Frenchman, "that I introduced him to you by the name of Landau, but his name is really Count Bezzubov, as you probably know, only he is not fond of the title." "Yes, I heard about it," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. "It is said he perfectly cured Countess Bezzubov." "She came to see me today," said the countess, addressing Alexey Alexandrovitch, "and it was sad to see her. This separation is terrible for her. It is such a blow to her." "Then he is positively going?" "Yes, he is going to Paris. Yesterday he heard a voice," said Lidia Ivanovna, looking at Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Oh, a voice," repeated he, feeling that it was necessary to use great prudence among these people where things occurred or might occur without his being able to explain them. A moment's silence ensued, at the end of which the Countess Lidia Ivanovna, as if accidentally stumbling on the chief topic of their conversation, said, with a sweet smile, addressing Oblonsky, "I have known of you for a long time, and I am delighted to make your acquaintance. Les amis de nos amis sont nos amis. But to be truly friends, we must know what is passing in the souls of those we love, and I fear you do not with regard to Alexey Alexandrovitch. You understand what I mean," she said, raising her beautiful, dreamy eyes. "I understand in part that Alexey Alexandrovitch's position," answered Oblonsky, not understanding very well what she was talking about, and preferring to confine himself to generalities. "The change is not in his external position," said the countess, solemnly, and at the same time looking tenderly at Alexey Alexandrovitch, who had risen to join Landau. "It is his heart which has changed. A new heart has been given to him, and I very much fear that you do not realize sufficiently the great transformation which has taken place in him." "That is, in a general way, I can perceive the change in him. We have always been friends, and now," said Oblonsky, answering the deep gaze of the countess with a tender one, as he queried with which of the two ministers she could do him the most effective service. "This transformation cannot diminish his love for his neighbor. On the contrary, the change which has taken place must increase love. But I fear you don't understand me. Will you not have some tea?" she asked, looking toward a lackey who entered with the tea tray. "Not altogether, countess. Of course, his misfortune—" "Yes, he underwent a misfortune, but it became the highest happiness because his heart was renewed," said she, raising her eyes lovingly to Stepan Arkadyevitch. "I believe I shall have to get her to speak to them both," thought Oblonsky. "Oh, assuredly, countess," said he. "But I think that these changes are so personal that no one likes to speak of them, even to his most intimate friends." "On the contrary, we ought to speak and to help one another." "Yes, without doubt, but there are such differences of conviction, and, moreover," and Oblonsky smiled unctuously, "there cannot be differences in regard to sacred truth." "Oh, yes, of course, but—" Stepan Arkadyevitch grew confused and stopped speaking. He perceived that the countess was talking about religion. "It seems to me that he's going to sleep," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, approaching the countess and speaking in a significant whisper. Stepan Arkadyevitch turned round. Landau was seated near the window, with his elbow leaning on the arm and back of a chair, and his head bowed as he saw the looks turned toward him. He raised his head and smiled in a naive and childlike manner. "Don't pay attention to him," said the countess, pushing a chair toward Alexey Alexandrovitch. "I have noticed," she began, but was interrupted by a lackey bringing her a letter. She read it through with extraordinary rapidity, sent a reply, and resumed the thread of her discourse. "I have noticed that Muscovites, the men especially, are very indifferent to religion." "Oh, no, countess. I think that Muscovites have the reputation of being very pious," replied Stepan Arkadyevitch. "But as far as I have observed, you yourself," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, with his weary smile, "I am sorry to say, belong to that category of the indifferents." "Is it possible to be indifferent?" cried Lydia Ivanovna. "I am not indifferent, but rather in the attitude of expectation," answered Oblonsky, with his most agreeable smile. "I do not yet think that the time for me to settle such questions has come yet." Alexey Alexandrovitch and the countess exchanged glances. "We can never know whether the time for us has come or not," said Alexey Alexandrovitch sternly. "We ought not even to think whether we are prepared or not. The blessing does not follow human calculations, does not always light upon the most deserving, but comes to those who are unprepared. Witness Saul." "It seems that it isn't to be now," murmured the countess, following with her eyes the movements of the Frenchman. Landau got up and joined them. "May I listen?" asked he. "Oh, yes, I do not wish to disturb you," said the countess tenderly. "Sit down with us." "The essential thing is not to close one's eyes to the light," continued Alexey Alexandrovitch. "Ah, if you knew what a blessing we experience when we feel his constant presence in our souls," said the Countess Lydia Ivanovna, with an ecstatic smile. "But a man may feel himself incapable of rising to such a height," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, convinced that the heights of religion were not his forte, but fearing to offend a person who, by one word to Pomorsky, might get him the place that he wanted. "You mean that sin may prevent him?" asked Lydia Ivanovna. "But that is a mistaken view. For him who believes, there is no more sin. Sin is already redeemed. Pardon?" she asked as the lackey brought her another note. She read it and answered verbally, "Say tomorrow, at the Grand Duchess's." Then she continued, "For the believer there is no sin." "Yes, but faith without works is dead," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, recalling this phrase of his catechism, with a smile establishing his independence. "That is the most famous passage in the Epistle of St. James," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, in a reproachful tone, looking at the countess as if to recall frequent discussions on the subject. "How much harm the false interpretation of that passage has done! It has driven more persons from the faith than anything else. 'I have no works, therefore I cannot believe,' is the logical conclusion from it. It means exactly the opposite." "It is our monks who claim to be saved by works, by their fastings, their abstinences," said the countess with an air of fastidious scorn. "Our way is far better and easier," she added, looking at Oblonsky with that scorching smile with which, at court, she was wont to wither young maids of honor, disconcerted at the newness of their position. "We are saved by Christ who suffered for us. We are saved by faith," resumed Alexey Alexandrovitch. "Vous comprenez l'anglais?" asked Lydia Ivanovna, and receiving an affirmative answer, she rose and took a small book from a side table. "Here I'm going to read to you 'Safe and Happy' or 'Under the Wing,'" said she, with a look of interrogation at Karenin. "It is very short," added she, resuming her seat and opening the book. "Here the way is described by which faith is attained, and the joy which is higher than any that earth can give, which fills the soul of the believer. A man who believes cannot be unhappy, because he is no longer alone. Yes, and here, you see," she was about to go on reading, when again the lackey appeared. "From Borozdin? Say to-morrow at 2:00. "Yes," she said with a sigh, marking the place in the book with her finger, and looking up with her pensive, loving eyes. "This is the way true faith is acquired. Are you acquainted with Marie Sanina? You have heard of her great affliction. She lost her only son. She was in despair. Well, how is it now? She found this friend. She thanks God for the death of her child. Such is the happiness faith can give." "Ah, yes. This is very," murmured Stepan Arkadyevitch, glad to be able to keep silent during this reading, and to think over his affairs a little. "I shall do better not to ask anything to-day," thought he. "Only how can I get out of this without compromising myself?" "This will be dull for you," said the Countess to Landau. "You don't understand English, but this is short." "Oh, I shall understand," said he with a smile, and he shut his eyes. Alexey Alexandrovitch and the countess significantly looked at one another, and the reading began. Chapter 21. Part 7, Chapter 22 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Stepan Arkadyevitch felt perfectly bewildered by these strange and to him unwonted discourses to which he had been listening. After the stagnation of Moscow, the complication of life in Petersburg as a general thing had an enlivening effect on him, but he liked it and was at home in it when he was among those whom he knew well. In this unfamiliar environment he was bewildered and stupefied, and could not make anything out of it. As he listened to the reading and saw the brilliant eyes of Landau, naive or knavish he could not tell which, fixed on him, he felt a peculiar heaviness in his head. The most heterogeneous thoughts went whirling through his brain. Marie Sanina is happy about having lost her son. It would be good if I could only smoke. To be saved one needs only to believe. The monks do not understand about this, but the Countess Lydia Ivanovna does. What makes my head feel so heavy? Is it the brandy or the strangeness of all this? I have done nothing out of the way as yet, but I shan't venture to ask anything to-day. It is said they make you say your prayers. Suppose they should make me say mine. That would be too nonsensical. What stuff that is she is reading. But she reads well. Landau Bezubov. Why is he Bezubov? Suddenly Stepan Arkadyevitch felt that his lower jaw was irresistibly beginning to accomplish a yawn. He smoothed his whiskers to conceal the yawn, and shook himself. But the next moment he felt sure that he was asleep, and even beginning to snore. The voice of the Countess Lydia Ivanovna waked him, saying, "He's asleep." Stepan Arkadyevitch waked with a start, feeling a consciousness of guilt. But instantly he was relieved to find that the words, "He's asleep," had reference, not to himself, but to Landau. The Frenchman was as sound asleep as Stepan Arkadyevitch had been, but Stepan Arkadyevitch's nap would have offended them. He did not think of this at the time, so strange did everything seem. But Landau's rejoiced them exceedingly, and especially the Countess Lydia Ivanovna. "Mon ami," said the Countess Lydia Ivanovna, cautiously so as not to disturb him, and picked up the folds of her silk gown in the enthusiasm of the moment, calling Karenin, not Alexey Alexandrovitch, but Mon ami, donnez-lui la main. Voyez-vous? Shh, said she to the lackey, who once more entered the parlour with a message. I can't receive it now. The Frenchman slept, or pretended to sleep, leaning his head on the back of his armchair and resting his hand on his knee, but making feeble gestures, as if he were trying to catch something. Alexey Alexandrovitch got up, and, cautiously, though he tripped over a table as he did so, stepped over to the chair and put his hand into the Frenchman's hand. Stepan Arkadyevitch also got up, and opening his eyes wide, and trying to decide whether he were asleep or not, looked from one to the other, and felt his ideas growing more and more confused. Que la personne qui arrive la dernière, ce qui demande, quelle sorte? The person who came in last, the one who is questioning, let him go away, murmured the Frenchman without opening his eyes. Vous m'excusez, mais vous voyez, revenez vers 10 heures, encore moins demain. You will excuse me, but you understand. Come back at 10 o'clock, or, still better, tomorrow. Quelle sorte? Repeated the Frenchman impatiently. C'est moi, n'est-ce pas? Asked Oblonsky, and at an affirmative sign, forgetting what he was going to ask Lydia Ivanovna, forgetting his sister's affairs, with one single desire to escape as soon as possible, hastened out on his tiptoes, and rushed down into the street as if he were fleeing from a pest-house, and for a long time talked and jested with his driver so as to bring back his spirits. At the French theatre, which he reached in time for the last act, and afterward over his champagne, at the Tartars, Stepan Arkadyevitch gradually began to breathe more freely in the friendly atmosphere. Nevertheless, all that evening he was very far from being himself. When he returned to the house of Pyotr Oblonsky, where he made his home in Petersburg, he found a note from Betsy. She wrote him that she was very desirous of finishing their talk, and urged him to call the next day. He had hardly finished reading this note and making up a face at it, when heavy shuffling steps were heard downstairs, as of men lifting some heavy object. Stepan Arkadyevitch went out to see what it was. It was the rejuvenated Pyotr Oblonsky, who was so tipsy that he could not walk upstairs, but when he caught sight of Stepan Arkadyevitch, he ordered his attendants to put him on his feet, and, clinging to Stepan Arkadyevitch's arm, he managed to reach his room, where he began to relate how he had spent the evening, till he fell asleep. Stepan Arkadyevitch himself was in such a weak state of mind that, contrary to his custom, he did not fall asleep quickly. What he had heard and seen during the day was disgusting, but more disgusting than anything else was the recollection of the evening at the Countess Lydia Ivanovna's. The next day he received from Alexey Alexandrovitch a flat refusal in the matter of the divorce, and knew that this decision was based on the words which the Frenchman had uttered during his slumber, real or feigned. Chapter 22. Part 7, Chapter 23 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. In order that anything may be accomplished in family life, it is requisite that between the husband and wife there should be either absolute discord or loving harmony. But when the relations between the two are uncertain, and there is neither the one nor the other, nothing can be accomplished. Many families remain for years in places of which the husband and wife both are tired and disgusted, simply because there is neither full discord nor full concord. Unendurable to Vronsky and Anna was their life in Moscow, in the heat and dust, when the sun shone, not now with its springtime beauty, but with its summer fervor, and all the trees along the boulevards had been long in leaf, and the leaves were already thick with dust. Though they had long before decided to remove to Vozdvizhenskoye, still they continued to live in Moscow, which was detestable to them both, and the reason for this was that of late there had been no harmony between them. The exasperation which tended to keep them apart had no tangible cause, and all attempts at an explanation, instead of closing the chasm, only widened it. It was an internal irritation which, as far as she was concerned, had for its source the diminution of his love for her, and on his part his annoyance because, thanks to her, he found himself placed in an embarrassing position, which she, instead of trying to relieve, made still more difficult. Neither he nor she formulated any definite complaints, but each considered the other in the wrong, and at every opportunity tried to make this evident. She considered that he, with all his habits, ideas, desires, with all his spiritual and physical tendencies, had one distinguishing quality, the power of loving women, and this love, she felt, ought by rights to be wholly concentrated on her. This love had diminished. Consequently, in her opinion, a part of this love must necessarily be transferred to others or to some other woman, and she was jealous. She was jealous not of any definite woman, but of his diminished love for her. Having as yet no definite object for her jealousy to rest on, she was on the watch for one. On the slightest pretext she would transfer her jealousy from one person to another. Sometimes she suspected him of low amours, which he might enter into as an unmarried man about town. Sometimes she distrusted ladies whom he might meet in society. Then again with the imaginary young lady whom he would be likely to marry in case he broke with her. This form of jealousy especially tormented her, for the reason that he himself had carelessly, in a moment of confidence one day, spoken of his mother's lack of tact in having ventured to propose to him to marry the young Princess Sorokin. And being thus jealous, Anna felt indignant with him and kept finding reasons for her indignation. For all the painfulness of her position, she blamed him. She considered him responsible for her painful state of expectancy which she was enduring in Moscow, as it were suspended between heaven and earth, for the uncertainty in which she lived, for Alexey Alexandrovitch's delay and indecision, and for her loneliness. If he loved her, he would understand the difficulty of her position and save her from it. He was to blame because she was living in Moscow and not in the country. He could not live in the country, as she wanted to do. He wanted society, and so condemned her to this horrible position, the trials of which he could not comprehend. And again, he was responsible for depriving her forever of her son. Even those rare moments of tenderness which they occasionally enjoyed did not appease her. She now detected in his tenderness a shade of calmness, of assurance, which he had never before shown, and which exasperated her. It was getting dark. Vronsky was at a gentleman's dinner, and Anna, while waiting for him, had taken refuge in his library, where the noise of the street was less oppressive than in the rest of the house. She walked up and down, going over in memory their last altercation. As she recalled in memory the insulting words that had been spoken, and tried to think what had led to it, she at last remembered how the quarrel had begun. For some time she found it impossible to believe that any dissension could have arisen from such an inoffensive conversation, from a subject which was so unimportant to anyone. But such was the fact. It all began from his having made sport of women's gymnasia, declaring them unnecessary, and she had taken up the cudgels in their defence. He had disrespectfully attacked the education of women in general, and had said that Anna's English protégée, had not the slightest need of knowing anything about physics. That had irritated Anna. She saw in it a derogatory reference to her own occupations, and she conjured up and uttered a phrase which was meant to repay him for the pain he inflicted on her. "I did not expect that you would comprehend me and my feelings as a man who really loved would, but I expected at least some delicacy," said she. And in reality he had reddened with vexation and made some unpleasant remark. She did not remember what retort she then made, but, whatever it was, he had said with a manifest intention of hurting her feelings, "I confess your devotion to that girl does not interest me, because I can see nothing in it but affectation." This cruelty of his, with which he demolished the fabric which she had with such labor erected so as to endure the trials of her life, this injustice of his in accusing her of pretense and affectation, drove her frantic. "It is very unfortunate that only what is low and material is comprehensible to you," she had retorted, and she left the room. When, in the evening, he came to see her, the discussion was not resumed, but they both felt that it was not forgotten. All this day he had not been at home, and she was so lonely and wretched, as she thought of their quarrels, that she resolved to forget everything, to ask his forgiveness, and to take the blame on herself, so as to bring about a reconciliation at any cost. "I am to blame. I am irritable. I am absurdly jealous. I will make it up with him, and we will leave for the country, and there I shall be calmer," she thought. Affectation. Ne naturalno. She suddenly remembered the word which had so affronted her, above all in his intention of causing her pain by it. I know what he meant. He meant by affected that I did not love my daughter, but loved another's child. What does he know of the love a child can inspire? Has he the least idea what I sacrificed for him in giving up Serosa? But this desire to wound me! No, he loves another woman. It must be so. And seeing that, even while she wanted to calm herself, she was once more going over the circle she had so many times traversed, and was once more returning to the same state of irritation, she was horror-struck. Is it wholly out of the question? Can I not attach him to myself? She queried, and then she began at the beginning again. He is true. He is honourable. He loves me. I love him. In a day or two dissension will be ended. What is necessary? Calmness, gentleness, and I shall bring him back to me. Yes, now, when he comes, I will tell him that I was to blame, although I was not to blame, and we will go off. And, in order not to think any more, and not to give way to her irritation, she gave orders to bring down her trunks, to begin preparations for departure. At 10 o'clock, Vronsky came in. End of chapter 23. Part 7, Chapter 24 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. "Well, did you have a gay time?" asked Anna, going to meet him with an apologetic and affectionate look on her face. "As such things usually are," answered he, noticing at once by her face that she was in one of her best moods. He was already accustomed to such metamorphoses, and this time he was particularly glad, because he himself was in his happiest frame of mind. "What do I see? This is good," he added, pointing to the trunks in the entry. "Yes, we must go. I went out to walk to-day, and it was so good that I longed to get back to the country. There's nothing to keep you here, is there?" "I should like nothing better. I will be back immediately, and we will talk it over. All I want is to change my coat. Have the tea brought." There was something irritating in the tone in which he said, "This is good," as one speaks to a child which has ceased to be capricious, and still more irritating was the discrepancy between her apologetic and his self-confident tone, and for a moment she felt rising within her the desire to be pugnacious. But making an effort to restrain herself, she relinquished it, and met Vronsky as gaily as before. When he came in, she told him calmly the incidents of the day and her plans for departure, using in part the very words she had thought over. "Do you know, it came over me like an inspiration," said she. "Why wait here for the divorce? Will it not be all the same when we are in the country? I cannot wait longer. I want to stop hoping about the divorce. I don't want to hear anything more about it. I think it won't have any more effect on my life. Don't you agree with me?" "Oh, yes," said he, looking with disquietude at Anna's excited face. "Come, tell me what you did. Who were there?" said she, after a moment's silence. Vronsky named over the guests. "The dinner was excellent, and we had a boat race, and it was all very jolly. But in Moscow nothing can be done sans ridicule. Some women, the swimming teacher of the Queen of Sweden, gave us an exhibition of her art." "What? Did she swim for you?" demanded Anna, frowning. "Yes, in an ugly red costume de nation. She was old and hideous. What day do we go?" "What an inane idea! Was there anything extraordinary about her method of swimming?" asked Anna, not replying to his question. "Not at all. I tell you it was horribly stupid. When have you decided to go?" Anna tossed her head as if to get rid of a disagreeable thought. "When shall we go? The sooner the better. To-morrow we can't, but the day after." "Yes. No. Wait. Day after to-morrow is Monday. I shall have to go to maman," said Vronsky, somewhat confused, because as he mentioned his mother's name he saw Anna's eyes fixed with a look of suspicion on him, and his confusion increased her distrust. She forgot the Queen of Sweden's swimming teacher in her alarm about the Princess Sorokin, who was living at a country seat in the suburbs of Moscow with the old countess. "Can't you go there to-morrow?" "Why, no, that's impossible. There is some business that I must attend to, a power of attorney, and the money will not be ready to-morrow." "If that is so, we won't go at all." "But why not?" "I won't go if it is put off later, Sunday or never." "Why so?" cried Vronsky in astonishment. "There's no sense in that." "It has no sense for you, because you never take me into account at all. You can't understand my life. The only thing that interests me here is Hannah. You say that is hypocrisy. You said last evening that I did not love my daughter, but that I pretended to love this English girl, that this was affectation. I should like to know what can be natural in the life I lead here." For an instant she came to herself and was frightened because she had broken her vow. But, though she knew that she was dashing to destruction, she could not resist the temptation of proving to him that he was in the wrong. She could not help heaping insults on him. "I never said that. I said that I did not sympathize with this sudden tenderness for her." "Why do you, who boast of being straightforward, tell me a lie?" "I never boast, and I never tell lies," said he, repressing the anger which was rising within him. "And I am very sorry if you do not respect—" "Respect? That was invented to cover up the lack of love. If you don't love me any more, it would be better and more honorable to say so." "No, this is becoming intolerable," cried the count, suddenly leaping from his chair, and, standing in front of her, speaking in measured tones. "Anna," he asked, "why do you try my patience so?" And she could see how he was holding back the bitter words that were ready to escape him. "It has its limits." "What do you mean by that?" she cried, looking with terror at the unconcealed expression of hate on his whole face, and especially in his fierce, cruel eyes. "I mean," he began. Then he stopped. "I have a right to demand what you wish of me." "What can I wish? I can only wish that you do not abandon me as you are thinking of doing," said she, comprehending all that he had left unsaid. "Everything else is secondary. I wish to be loved, but love is gone. All is over." She turned toward the door. "Stop, stop," said Vronsky, still darkly frowning, but holding her by the arm. "What is the trouble? I said that it is necessary to postpone our starting for 3 days, and you answer by saying that I lie and am dishonorable." "Yes, and I repeat that a man who throws it into my face that he has sacrificed everything for me," said she, alluding to a former quarrel, "is worse than dishonorable. He is heartless." "That settles it. My patience is at an end," cried Vronsky, quickly dropping her hand. "He hates me, that is certain," she thought, as she went from the room in silence with tottering steps. "He loves some other woman. That is more certain still," she said to herself as she reached her room. "I wish to be loved, but love is gone. All is over." She repeated the words that she had said. "I must put an end to it." But how? She asked herself, sinking into a chair before her mirror. The most heterogeneous thoughts crowded upon her. Where should she go? To her aunt who had brought her up? To Dolly? Or simply go abroad by herself? What was he doing alone in his study? Would the rupture be final, or was there a possibility of reconciliation? How would Alexey Alexandrovitch look upon it? And what would her former acquaintances in Petersburg say? Many other ideas of what would happen came into her mind, but she could not take any satisfactory account of them. A vague idea came into her mind, and awakened some interest, but she could not express it. Thinking once more of Alexey Alexandrovitch, she recalled a phrase that she had used after her illness, and the feeling that clung to her. "Why didn't I die?" And immediately the words awoke the feeling which they had at that time expressed. Yes, that was the idea which alone settled everything. Death, yes, is the only way of escape. My terrible shame, and the dishonor which I have brought on Alexey Alexandrovitch and Seroza, all will be wiped away by my death. If I die, he will repent for me then. He will be sorry. He will love me. He will suffer for me. A smile of pity for herself came over her face as she kept mechanically taking off and putting on the rings of her left hand, and with vivid imagination she pictured how he would feel after she was dead. Approaching steps, his steps, caught her ears. She affected to be busily engaged in taking off her rings, and did not turn her head. He came to her, and, taking her hand, said tenderly, "Anna, we will go day after tomorrow if you wish. I am ready for anything." "Well?" said he, waiting. She did not speak. "What do you say?" he asked. "You yourself know," said she, and then, unable to control herself longer, she burst into tears. Leave me, she murmured through her sobs. "I am going away tomorrow. I will do more. What am I? A lost woman, a millstone around your neck. I don't want to torment you. I will set you free. You do not love me. You love another." Vronsky begged her to be calm. He swore that there was not the slightest ground for her jealousy, and that he had never ceased and never should cease to love her, and that he loved her more than ever. "Anna, why torture yourself and me so?" he asked, as he kissed her hand. His face expressed the deepest tenderness, and it seemed to her that her ears caught the sound of tears in his voice, and that she felt their moisture on her hand. Passing suddenly from jealousy to the most passionate tenderness, she covered his head, his neck, his hands with kisses. End of chapter 24. Part 7, Chapter 25 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Feeling that their reconciliation was complete, Anna the next morning eagerly made her preparations for departure. Although it was not yet definitely decided whether they should start on Monday or Tuesday, since both days had certain contingencies, Anna was busily making her preparations for the journey, feeling now perfectly indifferent whether they went a little sooner or a little later. She was engaged in her room taking various articles from an open trunk, when Vronsky, already dressed, came to her earlier than usual. "I am going now to see maman. Perhaps she can get me the money through Yegorov, and then I shall be ready to go tomorrow," he said. She was feeling particularly cheerful, but his reference to his visit to his mother's dacha was like a stitch in the side. "No, I shall not be ready myself." And immediately she thought, so then it was possible to arrange it so as to do as I wished. "No, do just as you intended to. And now go to the dining room, and I will join you as soon as I have taken out these unnecessary things," she added, giving something more to Annushka, whose arms were already laden with a heap of articles. Vronsky was eating his beefsteak when she entered the dining room. "You can't realize how odious these apartments have become to me," said she, as she sat down by him. "Nothing is more detestable than these chambres garnies. There's no individuality in them, no soul. The clock, the curtains, and especially the wallpapers. They are cauchemar. I think of Vozdvizhenskoye as of the Promised Land. Shall you not send on the horses in advance?" "No, they will follow us. But were you going anywhere?" "I wanted to go to the Wilsons. I must get a gown. So it is decided that we go tomorrow, is it?" she added in a joyous tone. But suddenly her face changed. Vronsky's valet came in and asked him to sign a receipt for dispatch from Petersburg. Still there was nothing remarkable in Vronsky's receiving a telegram. but he acted as if he wanted to conceal something from her, and, saying that he would sign it in his library, he turned to her. "Tomorrow, without fail, I shall have finished everything." "From whom is the dispatch?" she asked, not hearing him. "From Stiva," answered the count reluctantly. "Why didn't you show it to me? What secret can there be between Stiva and me?" Vronsky called the valet back and ordered him to bring in the telegram. "I did not care to show it because Stiva has a passion for telegraphing. Why need he send me a dispatch to tell me that nothing was decided?" "About the divorce?" "Yes. He maintains that he cannot get a definite answer. Here, see for yourself." Anna took the dispatch with a trembling hand. It read as Vronsky had told her. At the end it said, "Little hope, but I shall do everything possible and impossible." "I told you yesterday that it was absolutely immaterial to me when I received the divorce, or whether I get it at all," said she, flushing, "so that it is perfectly useless to hide anything from me." "In the same way he can hide from me his correspondence with women," thought she. "Yashvin wanted to come this morning, with Viotov," said Vronsky. "It seems that he has been gambling again, and has won from Pjepstov all that he has and more than he can pay, about 60,000 rubles." "No," said she, vexed because by this change in the conversation he so evidently insinuated that she was vexed. "Why do you think that this news interests me so much that you must hide it from me? I told you that I did not want to think about it, and I should wish that you had as little interest in it as I." "It interests me because I like clearness." "Clearness? But in love, not in mere outside show," said she, getting more and more angry, not at his words, but at the tone of cool calmness in which he spoke. "Why do you want a divorce?" "Bozhe moi, always love," thought Vronsky, frowning. "You know very well why. It is for your sake, and for the children we may have." "There will not be any more children." "I am sorry for that." "You feel the need of it because of the children. But don't you have some thought of me?" she said, forgetting that he had just said, "for your sake and the children's." The question of the possibility of having children had been long vexatious and trying to her. She took his desire to have children as a proof of indifference toward her beauty. "Ugh! I said for your sake. More than all for your sake. I am convinced that your irritability comes largely from the uncertainty of your position," he answered, scowling with annoyance. "Yes, now he has ceased to pretend, and all his cold hatred of me is plain to be seen," she said to herself, not hearing his words, but gazing with horror at a cold and cruel judge who looked out of his eyes and mocked her. "That is not the cause," said she, "and I do not understand how my irritability, as you call it, can be caused by the fact that I have come absolutely into your power. How is my position indefinite? It seems to me the contrary." "I am sorry that you are not willing to understand," he replied, obstinately determined to express his thought. "Its uncertainty comes from this, that you think that I am free." "Oh, as far as that goes, you can be perfectly easy," said she, turning from him and beginning to drink her coffee. She took the cup, raising her little finger, and put it to her lips, and as she drank she looked at him, and by the expression of his face saw clearly that her motions and the sounds that she made in swallowing were repulsive to him. "It is absolutely indifferent to me what your mother thinks, and how she intends to marry you off," said she, putting down the cup with a trembling hand. "We will not talk of that." "Yes, we will too. And I assure you that a heartless woman, whether young or old, your mother or anybody else, does not interest me, and I don't want to know her." "Anna, I beg you not to speak disrespectfully of my mother." "A woman who has no conception of what the honor and happiness of her son consist in, has no heart." "I repeat my request that you will not speak disrespectfully of my mother, whom I respect," reiterated the count, raising his voice and looking severely at Anna. She did not reply, but looked attentively at his face and his hands, and recalled with all its details the scene of the evening before, and his passionate caresses. "Just such caresses he has lavished, and will still continue to lavish, on other women," she thought. "You don't love your mother. Those are simple words, words, words," said she, looking at him with eyes full of hatred. "If that is the case, it is necessary." "It is necessary to decide, and I have decided," said she, and was preparing to leave the room, when the door opened and Yashvin entered. She stopped immediately and bade him good morning. Why, when her soul was full of bitterness, when she felt that she was at the turning point of her life, which might take a terrible direction, why, at this moment, she had to dissimulate before a stranger, who sooner or later would know all, she could not tell, but, calming the inner tumult of her feelings, she sat down again and began to talk with the guest. "Well, how are your affairs? Have they paid you your debt?" she asked. "No, not yet. Probably I shall not get it all. And I've got to leave Wednesday," said Yashvin awkwardly, glancing at Vronsky and evidently suspecting that a quarrel was in progress. "When do you leave?" "Day after tomorrow, I think," said Vronsky. "You have taken long to make up your minds." "But now it is all decided," said Anna, looking straight into Vronsky's eyes with a look that told him how impossible it was to think of reconciliation. "Didn't you feel sorry for that unlucky Pyepstov?" asked Anna, addressing Yashvin. "I have never asked myself whether I pitied a man or not, Anna Arkadyevna. My whole fortune is here," said he, pointing to his pocket. "Now I am a rich man, but I may come out of the club this evening a beggar. Whoever plays with me would gladly leave me without a shirt, and I him. Well, we engage in war, and that makes the fun." "Well, but if you were married, how would it be for your wife?" Yashvin laughed. "But I am not married, and I don't expect to marry." "But how about Helsingfors?" suggested Vronsky, joining in the conversation and looking at Anna's smiling face. But as she met his glance her face suddenly amassed a set and cold expression, as much as to say to him, "I have not forgotten. It's still the same." "And haven't you ever been in love?" she asked of Yashvin. "Oh, Lord, plenty of times. Only remember, one may sit down to cards, but must be able to get up when the time comes for a rendezvous. But I interest myself in love affairs in such a way that I need not be late to play my hand in the evening. And so I always arrange matters." "You misunderstand. I did not ask about that, but about actual—" she wanted to say Helsingfors, but she did not like to use a word which Vronsky had just spoken. Vyatov came at this moment to see about a horse which he had bought, and Anna got up and left the room. Before he left the house, Vronsky went to her room. She pretended to look for something on the table, but then, being ashamed of this dissimulation, she looked him straight in the face. She asked him coolly in French, "What do you want?" "The certificate for Gambetta. I've sold him," answered Vronsky, in a tone which said louder than words, "I have not time for explanations, nor would they lead to anything." "I'm not to blame," thought he, "if she wants to punish herself. Tant pis pour elle." However, as he left the room he thought she said something to him, and his heart was suddenly touched with compassion for her. "What is it, Anna?" "I said nothing," she answered coldly and calmly. "Nothing. Tant pis," said he to himself. On his way out, as he passed a mirror, he caught sight in it of her pale face and trembling lips. He was tempted to go back and say some comforting words to her, but he was already too far on his way. He passed the entire day outside the house, and when he came home the maid informed him that Anna Arkadyevna had a headache, and begged him not to disturb her. Chapter 25. Part 7, Chapter 26 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Never before had they let the day end with a quarrel unsettled. This was the first time. This was not a mere quarrel. It was evidently the avowal of permanent coldness. How was it possible for him to look at her as he had done when he came into her room after his document? How could he look at her and see that her heart was full of despair, and then go out with a calm, indifferent face? He had not only grown cold to her, but he hated her, because he loved some other woman. This was clear. And, as she recalled all the cruel words which he had said to her, Anna began to imagine also the words which she was certain he would like to say to her and might say, and she grew more and more irritated. "I will not keep you," she imagined him saying. "You may go wherever you please. As you don't care to be divorced from your husband, you probably intend to go back to him. If you want money, I will give it to you. How many rubles do you want?" All these insulting words which the cruel man might say were said merely in her imagination, but she could not forgive him any more than if he had really said them. "But did he not swear to me only yesterday that he loved me? Is he not a sincere and honest man?" she said to herself a moment afterward. "Have I not been in despair several times before, all for nothing?" She passed the entire day, except 2 hours during which she made a visit to her protégés, the Wilsons, in alternate doubt and hope. Was all at an end? Was there any chance of a reconciliation? Should she leave him then and there, or should she wait and see him once again? She waited for him all day. And in the evening she went to her room, telling Annushka to say that she had a headache. "If he comes in spite of that, it will show that he loves me still. If not, it is over, and I shall make up my mind what there is for me to do." Late in the evening she heard his carriage wheels on the pavement, his ring and his steps, and his colloquy with the maid. He believed what he was told. He did not care to make further inquiries, and went to his room. Evidently all was at an end, and death as the only means of establishing a love for her in his heart, of punishing him, and of winning the victory in the struggle which the evil spirit that had possession of her soul was waging with him, clearly, vividly presented itself before her. Now everything was a matter of indifference. Whether they went to the country or not, whether she procured the divorce or not, it was unnecessary. The one essential thing was to punish him. When she poured out her usual dose of opium, and it came over her that if she swallowed all that was in the vial she would die, it seemed so easy and simple that she felt a real joy in imagining how he would mourn, repent, and love her when it was too late. She lay on her bed with open eyes, and watched the dying candlelight on the moulded cornice of the ceiling mingle with the shadows of the screen which divided the room. She vividly pictured to herself how he would think when she was no more, when she was only a memory. "How could I speak to her such cruel words?" he would say to himself. "How could I leave her without saying anything at all? And now she is no more. She has left us for ever. She is there." Suddenly the shadow of the screen seemed to waver and cover the whole cornice, the whole ceiling. Other shadows from the other sides joined in with it. For an instant they seemed to be running, then with new rapidity they trembled, melted together, and all became dark. "Death," thought she, and such a great terror seized upon her that for a long time she did not know where she was, and it was long before her trembling hands could find the matches in order to light another candle in place of the one that had burned down and gone out. "No, no, anything, only to live. I love him, and he loves me. These dreadful days will go by," she said to herself, feeling the tears of joy poured down her cheeks at her return to life, and to escape her terror she fled to Vronsky's library. He was in his library, soundly sleeping. She went to him and, holding the candle above his face, looked at him a long time. Now, as he slept, she felt such love for him that at the sight of him she could not refrain from tears of tenderness. But she knew that, if he woke he would look at her with a cold, self-justifying look, and that before she spoke a word of her love she would not be able to resist the temptation of proving to him how wrong he was. Without waking him she went back to her room, and after a second dose of opium she fell into a heavy sleep which lasted till morning, and all the time she was conscious of herself. Toward morning she had the frightful nightmare which she had experienced several times even before her liaison with Vronsky. She saw a little old man with unkempt beard doing something, bending over a gourd, and muttering unintelligible French words, and, as always when she had this nightmare, and therein lay the horror of the dream, she felt that the little old man paid no heed to her, but did this horrible something in the gourd over her head. She awoke in a cold perspiration. When she got up, the events of the day before seemed enveloped in mist. There was a quarrel. It has happened several times before. I said I had a headache, and he didn't come to see me. That is all. To-morrow we shall go away. I must see him, and get ready for our departure, she said to herself, and knowing that he was in his library, she started to go to him. But, in crossing the drawing-room, her attention was arrested by the sound of a carriage stopping, and she looked out of the window and saw a carriage, from the window of which a young girl in a light hat was putting out her hand and giving orders to the footman, who was at the door-bell. After a colloquy in the vestibule, some one came upstairs, and Anna heard Vronsky's steps in the room next to the drawing-room. Then he ran swiftly downstairs. Anna looked out again, and saw him go to the doorsteps, bareheaded, and approach the carriage. The young girl in the lilac-colored hat handed him a package. Vronsky smiled as he spoke to her. The carriage drove away, and Vronsky came quickly upstairs again. The mist which enwrapped everything in Anna's soul suddenly cleared away. The feelings of the day before tore her anguished heart more cruelly than ever. She now could not understand how she could have so far debased herself as to stay a single day under his roof. She went to his library to acquaint him with the resolution that she had taken. "The Princess Sorokin and her daughter have brought me the money and the papers from Maman. I could not get them yesterday. How is your headache? Better?" he said quietly, seeming not to notice the gloomy and solemn expression of Anna's face. She did not reply, but, standing in the middle of the room, she looked fixedly at him. He glanced at her for an instant. His brows contracted, and he continued to read his letter. Without speaking, Anna turned slowly about and left the room. He might yet detain her, but she had reached the door. He said not a word. The only sound heard was the rustling of the sheet of paper. "Oh, by the way," he exclaimed, just as she was on the threshold, "do we really go to-morrow?" "You, but not I," answered she, turning round on him. "Anna, it is impossible to live this way." "You, not I," she repeated. "It's becoming intolerable." You will be sorry for this," said she, and she went out. Frightened at the despairing tone with which she spoke these last words, he sprang up and started to follow her. But, on reflection, he seated himself again, and, firmly clenching his teeth, he frowned. That unbecoming threat, as he termed it, irritated him. "I have tried every means," he said to himself. "The only thing left is to pay no attention." And he made up his mind to go to the city and to his mother's again, to have her sign a deed. Anna heard the sound of his steps in his library and the dining-room. He stopped at the drawing-room. But he did not come to her. He only gave some directions about sending the stallion to Vyatov. Then she heard the calash drive to the entrance, a door opened, and Vronsky went out. Then he came back into the vestibule again, and someone ran upstairs. It was his valet, who was sent to get a pair of forgotten gloves. She went to the window and saw Vronsky take his gloves, then touch the coachman's back and say some words to him. And then, without glancing at the window, he sat down as usual, in the carriage, crossing one leg over the other. And, putting on the gloves, he turned the corner and disappeared from Anna's sight. End of chapter 26. Part 7, Chapter 27 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. "He is gone. It's all over," said Anna to herself as she stood at the window, and the impression of blackness which she had felt in the night at the dying of the candle, and that of the nightmare blending in one, filled her heart with chill horror. "No, I cannot endure this," she cried, and crossing the room, she rang the bell violently. She was so afraid to stay alone that, without waiting, she went to meet the servant. "Find out where the count has gone." The man replied that he had gone to the stables. He left word that the carriage would return immediately if you wished to go out." "Very well. Wait, I'm going to write a note. Send Mikhail with it to the stables. Have him hurry." She sat down and wrote, "I am to blame. Come back. We must explain things. For heaven's sake, come. I am frightened." She sealed the note and gave it to the servant, and, in her fear of being alone, she went to the nursery. "Why, he is not the same as he was. Where are his blue eyes, and his pretty, timid smile?" It was her first thought when she saw the plump and rosy little girl, with her dark curly hair, instead of Seroza, whom, in the confusion of her thoughts, she had expected to see. The little girl was seated at the table, noisily tapping on it with a glass stopper. She looked unintelligently at her mother with two dark, currant-colored eyes. Answering the English nurse that she was well, and expected to go to the country the next day, Anna sat down beside the little girl and began to spin the stopper from the carafe in front of her. The motion of the child's brows and her hearty laugh recalled Vronsky so vividly that Anna, choking down her sobs, rose suddenly and hurried from the room. "Is it possible that all is over? No, it cannot be," she thought. "He will return. But how can he explain that smile of his and his animation after he spoke with her? But even if he doesn't explain it, I shall believe him. If I do not believe, there is only one thing left, and that I do not want." She looked at her watch. 12 minutes had gone by. "Now he must have received my note, and must come back in 10 minutes. And what if he shouldn't come back? No, but that's impossible. He must not find me with red eyes. I'll go and bathe my face. There. Have I brushed my hair yet?" She could not remember. She put her hands to her head. "Yes, I brushed my hair, but I really don't remember when it was." She actually did not believe that her hands told her truly, and she went to the pier glass to see. Her hair was properly arranged, but she could not remember anything about it. "Who is this?" she asked herself, as she caught sight of a glowing face and strangely brilliant eyes gazing at her from the mirror. "Yes, it is I," and she suddenly seemed to feel his kisses, and she shivered and shrugged her shoulders. Then she put her hand to her lips and kissed it. "It must be that I am going out of my mind," and she fled to her room, which Anushka was putting in order. "Anushka," said she, as she stood before the maid, not knowing what to say. "Will you go to Darya Alexandrovna's?" said the maid, as if reading her thoughts. "To Darya Alexandrovna's? Yes, I will go there. 15 minutes to go, 15 to come back. He ought to be here." She looked at her watch. "Oh, how could he leave me in such a condition? How can he live, and not be at peace with me?" She went to the window and looked out into the street. Perhaps she had made a mistake in calculating, and she began over again to count the minutes since he left. Just as she was about going to consult the great clock, so as to verify hers, a carriage stopped before the door. It was the count's calash, but no one came upstairs, and she heard voices in the vestibule. It was the messenger who came back in the calash. She hurried down to him. "They were too late for the count. He has gone to the Nizhegorodsky railway station." "What is the matter? What is it?" she asked, addressing the ruddy, jolly Mikhail, who handed her back the note. Oh, yes, he did not receive it, she remembered. "Go with this note to the Countess Vronsky's in the country, you understand, and bring an answer back to me immediately." "But what shall I do?" she thought. "Yes, I will go to see Dolly, to be sure, or else I shall go out of my mind. I might telegraph." And she wrote the following dispatch: "I absolutely must speak to you. Come back immediately." Having sent the telegram, she went and dressed, and then, with her hat on, she again looked at the stout, good-natured Anushka, whose little, gentle gray eyes were full of sympathy. "Anushka, my dear, what am I to do?" murmured she, dropping into an armchair with a sob. "You mustn't excite yourself so, Anna Arkadyevna. Go out for a drive. That will divert you. These things will happen," said the maid. "Yes, I am going out," said Anna, collecting her thoughts and rising. "If a dispatch comes while I am gone, Send it to Darya Alexandrovna's, or no, I will come back. I must keep from thinking. I must do something, and go out, and, above all, get out of this house," thought she, listening with alarm to the wild beating of her heart. She hastened out and got into the calash. "Where do you wish to go?" asked Pyotr, just before he took his seat on the box. "To Znamenko, to the Oblonskys'." Chapter 27. Part 7, Chapter 28 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. The weather was clear. A fine thick rain had fallen all the morning, but now it had just cleared off. The roofs and the flagstones and harnesses and the metal work of the carriages glittered in the May sunshine. It was 3 o'clock, the liveliest time in the streets. Sitting in the corner of the comfortable calash, which swung easily on its elastic springs as it rolled swiftly along, drawn by a pair of greys, Anna, soothed by the monotonous rumble of the wheels and the hurrying impressions that she received in the fresh, pure air, reviewed the events of the past few days, and her situation seemed entirely different from what it had been at home. Now, the idea of death did not frighten her so much, and death itself did not seem to her so inevitable. Now she blamed herself for the humiliation to which she had stooped. I begged him to forgive me. I bent before him. I accused myself. Why did I? Can't I live without him? And, leaving this question unanswered, she began to read the signboards mechanically. Konter escalade. Zubnoy vrach. Yes, I will tell Dolly all about it. She does not love Vronsky. It will be hard, shameful, but I will confess everything. She loves me. I will follow her advice. I will not allow him to treat me like a child. Filipov, Kalachki. They say they send those loaves as far as Petersburg. The water at Moscow is so good. Ah, the wells of Muitischensky. And she remembered how long, long ago, when she was 17, she had gone with her aunt to the monastery of Triotsa. They traveled with horses in those days. Was it really I, with the red hands? How many things which seemed then beautiful and unattainable are worthless to me now. What I was then is past forever beyond recall, and ages could not bring me back. Would I have believed then that I could have fallen into such debasement? How proud and self-satisfied he will be when he reads my note. But I will tell him. How disagreeable this paint smells. Why are they always painting and building? Modui I Uberi, a fashionable dressmaker, she read. A man bowed to her. It was Anushka's husband. Our parasites, as Vronsky says. Ours. Why ours? Ah, if one could tear out the past by the roots. But that's impossible. One can only avoid thinking about it. And I do that. And yet, here she recalled her past with Alexey Alexandrovitch, and how she had driven him out of her memory. Dolly will think that I am leaving the second husband, and that I am, therefore, really bad. Do I want to be good? I cannot. And she felt the tears coming. And, seeing 2 happy young girls going by, she fell to wondering why they were smiling at each other. Probably about love. They don't know how sad and wretched it is. The boulevards and the children. There are 3 little boys playing horse. Seroza, my little Seroza. I shall lose all. I shall never have him again. Well, if he does not come back, all is indeed lost. Perhaps he missed the train and has already reached home. Do I wish to humiliate myself still more? She said, reproaching herself for her weakness. No, I am going to Dolly's. I shall say to her, I am unhappy. I am suffering. I deserve it, but I am so unhappy. Help me. Oh, these horses, this calash. How I hate to use them. They are his. I will never see them again. While thinking over what she should say to Dolly and deliberately torturing her heart, She reached the house, and went up the steps. "Is there anyone here?" she asked in the anteroom. "Katerina Alexandrovna Levina," answered the servant. "Kitty! The same Kitty with whom Vronsky was once in love," thought Anna. "And he thinks of her with love, and is sorry that he did not marry her. And he thinks of me with hate, and is sorry that he ever met me." When Anna arrived, the two sisters were talking over the subject of feeding babies. Dolly went alone to the drawing room to receive the guests that had come to disturb their conversation. "You haven't gone away yet. I was just going to your house," said Dolly. "I have a letter from Stiva today." "We had a dispatch," answered Anna, glancing round to see if Kitty was coming. "He writes that he does not understand what Alexey Alexandrovitch requires, but that he will not come away till he has a definite answer." "I thought you had company. May I read the letter?" "Yes. Kitty," said Dolly, confused. "She is in the nursery. You know she has been very ill." "I heard so. May I read the letter?" "Certainly. I'll go and get it. Alexey Alexandrovitch does not refuse. On the contrary, Stiva is quite hopeful," said Dolly, stopping at the door. "I neither hope nor want anything," said Anna. "Does Kitty think it humiliating to meet me?" thought Anna when she was left alone. "Perhaps she is right. But she who once loved Vronsky has no right to thrust it in my face, even if she is right. I know that a virtuous woman cannot receive me in my present position. I have given up everything for him, and this is my reward. Oh, how I hate him! Why did I come here? I am more wretched here than at home." She heard the voices of the two sisters in an adjoining room. "And what am I to say to Dolly? Delight Kitty with the spectacle of my misery? Submit to her condescension? Never! Even Dolly wouldn't understand. I will not say anything to her. All I should want to see Kitty for would be to show her that I am indifferent, that I scorn every one and everything." Dolly came in with the letter. Anna silently looked it through and returned it. "I knew all that," said she, "but it doesn't interest me at all." "Now, why not? I have good hopes," said Dolly, looking critically at Anna. She had never seen her in such a strange state of irritation. "When do you go away?" Anna half closed her eyes, and looked before her without answering. "Is Kitty afraid of me?" she asked after a moment, glancing toward the door with heightened color. "Oh, what nonsense! She is nursing the baby. It does not go very well yet. I have been giving her some advice. She will be delighted, and is coming directly," answered Dolly, awkwardly, not knowing how to tell a fib. "Oh, there she is now." When Kitty heard that Anna was there, she had not wished to appear, but Dolly had persuaded her. Controlling her repugnance, she went to the parlor, and, blushing as she approached Anna, she held out her hand. "I am very glad," she said in a trembling voice. Kitty was confused by the struggle between her dislike of this wicked woman and her desire to be polite to her, but, as soon as she saw Anna's beautiful, attractive face, all her unfriendliness vanished. "I should not have been surprised if you had refused to see me. I am used to everything," said Anna. "You have been very ill. Yes, you have changed." Kitty felt that Anna looked at her with dislike, and she attributed her unfriendliness to the awkward position in which she stood in regard to herself, having once been her special favorite. Her heart was filled with compassion. They talked of Kitty's illness, about her baby, and of Stiva, but evidently nothing interested Anna. "I came to bid you good-bye," she said to Dolly, as she rose. "When do you go?" But without answering her, Anna turned to Kitty. "Well, I am very glad to have seen you again," said she with a smile. "I have heard so much about you from every one, and especially from your husband. He came to see me, and I liked him very much," she added with a wicked emphasis. "Where is he?" "He has gone to the country," answered Kitty, blushing. "Give my love to him. Now don't forget." "I will do it, certainly," said Kitty, simply, with a compassionate look. "So, Pryashi, Dolly, good-bye," said Anna, kissing her, and shaking hands with Kitty, she hastened away. "She is as fascinating as ever," remarked Kitty to her sister, when Dolly rejoined Kitty. "And how beautiful she is! But there is something very painful about her. terribly painful. She doesn't seem to be in her usual state to-day. I thought she came near to bursting into tears when I accompanied her into the anteroom." End of chapter 28. Part 7, Chapter 29 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Anna took her seat in her carriage in an even unhappier state of mind than she had been when she left her house. In addition to her former sufferings, she now felt the humiliation and sense of moral degeneracy which her meeting with Kitty had clearly made evident. "Where do you wish to go now? Home?" asked Pyotr. "Yes, home," she replied, not thinking at all where she was going. They looked on me as some strange, incomprehensible curiosity. What can that man be saying so eagerly to the other? She thought, seeing two passers-by talking together. Is it possible to say what one really feels? I wanted to confess to Dolly, and I am glad that I kept still. How she would have rejoiced at my unhappiness! She would have tried to hide it, but at heart she would have been glad. She would have thought it just that I should be punished for that happiness which she begrudged me, and Kitty would have been still more pleased. How I read her through and through! She knows her husband liked me uncommonly well, and she is jealous, and hates me. And, what's more, she despises me. In her eyes I am an immoral woman. If I had been an immoral woman, I might have made him fall in love with me, if I had wanted to. I confess I thought of it. There goes a man who is delighted with his own looks, she said to herself, as a tall, florid man went by, and, mistaking her for an acquaintance, lifted his shiny hat from his shiny bald head and instantly recognized his mistake. He thought he knew me. He knows me quite as well as anyone in the world knows me. I don't know myself. I only know my appetites, as the French say. They covet some of that bad ice cream, she said to herself, as she watched two little street children standing in front of a vendor who had just set down from his head a tub of ice cream and was wiping his face with the corner of his coat. We all want our sweet delicacies, if not sugar plums, then bad ice creams, just like Kitty, who, not catching Vronsky, took Levin. She envies me, she hates me, and we all hate one another. I Kitty, and Kitty me. That is a fact. Tinkin confière. Je me fais confier par Tinkin. I will tell him this nonsense when he comes, thought she, and smiled, and then instantly remembered that there was no one now to whom she could tell amusing things. There's nothing amusing, nothing gay. It is all disgusting. The vesper bell is ringing, and the storekeeper is crossing himself so quickly that no one would think he was afraid of losing the chance. Why these churches, these bells, these lies? Just to hide the fact that we all hate one another, like those izvozchiks who are swearing at each other so angrily. Yashvin was right when he said, "He is after my shirt, and I am after his." That is a fact. She was so engrossed by these thoughts that she forgot her grief for a while, and was surprised when the carriage stopped in front of her house. The sight of the Swiss, coming to meet her, reminded her that she had sent a letter and a telegram. "Is there an answer yet?" "I will go and see," said the Swiss, and, looking on the secretary, he came back in a moment with a telegram in a thin, square envelope. Anna read, "I cannot be back before 10 o'clock. Vronsky." "And has the messenger come back?" "Not yet," replied the Swiss. "Ah, if that is so, then I know what I must do." And, feeling a vague sense of anger and a desire for vengeance arising in her soul, she ran upstairs. "I myself will go and find him," thought she. "Before I go away forever, I will tell him all. I never hated anyone as I hate this man." And when she caught sight of Vronsky's hat hanging on the peg, she shivered with aversion. She did not reflect that the dispatch was an answer to her telegram, and that he could not as yet have received her note. She imagined him now chatting gaily with his mother and the Princess Sorokin, without a thought of her suffering. "Yes, I must go as quickly as possible," she said, not knowing at all whither she should go. She felt that she must fly from the thoughts that oppressed her in this terrible house. The servants, the walls, the furniture, everything about it, filled her with disgust and pain, and crushed her with a terrible weight. Yes, I must go to the railway station, and if not there, then somewhere else, to punish him. She looked at the timetable in the newspaper. The evening train went at 8:02. Yes, I shall have plenty of time. She ordered the 2 other horses to be harnessed, and she had transferred from her trunk to her travelling bag things enough to last for several days. She knew that she should never come back again. She revolved 1,000 plans in her head, and determined that when she had done what she had in mind to do, either at the countess's country seat or at the station, she would go to the first city on the Nizhny Novgorod railway and stay there. Dinner was on the table. She went to it, smelt the bread and cheese, and persuading herself that the odor of the victuals was repugnant to her, she ordered the carriage again and went out. The house was already casting a shadow across the wide street, but the sky was clear and it was warm in the sun. Anushka, who brought her things, and Pyotr, who carried them to the carriage, and the coachman, who was evidently angry, all were disagreeable to her, and vexed her with their words and motions. "I do not need you, Pyotr." "Who will get your ticket?" "Well, go if you wish. It makes no difference to me," she said pettishly. Pyotr nimbly mounted the box, and, folding his arms, ordered the coachman to drive to the station. Chapter 29. Part 7, Chapter 30 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. "Now I am myself again. Now I remember it all," said Anna to herself as soon as the calash started, and rocking a little, rattled along over the cobblestones of the pavement, and once more her impressions began to go whirling through her mind. Yes, what was that good thing that I was thinking about last? Tuitkin? The coiffeur? Oh no, not that. Oh, yes, what Yashvin said about the struggle for existence, and hatred, the only thing that unites men. No, we go at haphazard. She saw in a carriage drawn by 4 horses a party of merrymakers who had evidently come to the city for a pleasure trip. And the dog which you take with you does not help you at all. You can't get out of yourself. Glancing in the direction where Pyotr was turning, she saw a working man, almost dead drunk, who, with a flopping head, was being led by a policeman. She added, "That man's way is quicker. Count Vronsky and I did not reach this pleasure, though we expected much." And now for the first time Anna turned this bright light, all revealing, upon her relations with the count. Hitherto she had steadfastly refused to do so. What did he seek in me? A satisfaction for his vanity rather than for his love. She remembered Vronsky's words, and the expression of his face, which reminded her of a submissive dog, when they first met and loved. Everything seemed a confirmation of this thought. Yes, he cared for the triumph of success above everything. Of course, he loved me, but chiefly from vanity. Now that he is not proud of me any more, it is over. He is ashamed of me. He has taken from me all that he could take, and now I am of no use to him. I weigh upon him, and he does not want to be in dishonorable relationship with me. He said, yesterday, he wanted the divorce and to marry me so as to burn his ships. Perhaps he loves me still, but how? The zest is gone, she said in English. That man likes to show off, and he is mighty proud of himself, she added, as she looked at a ruddy-faced man riding by on a hired horse. There is nothing about me any longer to his taste. If I leave him, he will rejoice in the bottom of his heart. This was not mere hypothesis. She saw this clearly, in the penetrating light which now revealed to her the meaning of life and of her false relations. My love has been growing more and more passionate and selfish. His has been growing fainter and fainter. That is why we cannot get on together, she went on thinking. There can't be any help for it. He is all in all to me. I struggle to draw him closer and closer to me, and he wants to fly from me. Up to the time of our union, we flew to meet each other, but now we move irresistibly apart. This cannot be altered. He accuses me of being absurdly jealous, and I am. I confess that I am absurdly jealous, and yet I am not either. I am not jealous, but my love is no longer satisfied. But she opened her mouth to speak, and, in the excitement caused by the stress of her thoughts, she changed her place in the carriage. If I could only be something else than a passionate mistress, but I cannot, and I do not wish to be, and by this very wish I awake his dislike of me, while he stirs up all my evil passions, and this cannot be otherwise. Don't I know that he would not deceive me, that he is no longer in love with Kitty, that he has no intention of marrying Sorokina? I know it well, but it is none the easier for me. If now that he no longer loves me, he is kind, affectionate to me, merely from a sense of duty, but cannot be what I must have, then what would be 1,000 times worse than to have him angry with me? That would be hell. And so it is. He has long ceased to love me. When love ceases, hate begins. I don't know these streets at all. What hosts of houses! In them, people. No end of them. And they all hate one another. Well, let me think what could happen to me now that would give me happiness again. Suppose that Alexey Alexandrovitch should consent to the divorce, and would give me back Seroza, and that I should marry Vronsky. And as she thought of Alexey Alexandrovitch, Anna could see him with extraordinary vividness before her, as if alive, with his dull, lifeless, faded eyes, his white, blue-veined hands, and his cracking joints, and the intonations of his voice, and, as she recalled their relation to each other, which had been called love, she shuddered with aversion. Well, suppose I got the divorce, and were married to Vronsky, would not Kitty still look at me as she looked at me to-day? She certainly would. Would not Seroza ask and wonder why I had 2 husbands? But between me and Vronsky, what new feeling could I imagine? Is it possible that our relations might be, if not pleasanter, at least not so tormenting as they are now? No, and no, she replied without the least hesitation. Impossible. We are growing apart, and I make him unhappy. He makes me unhappy, and I cannot change him. Every means has been tried. The screw has been turned for the last time. Now there's a beggar with a child. She thinks she inspires pity. Were we not thrown into the world to hate one another, and to torment ourselves and everybody else? Here come the schoolboys out to play. Seroza? It reminded her of her son. I used to think that I loved him, and I was touched by his gentleness. I have lived without him. I have given him up for my love, and was not sorry for the change, as long as I was contented with him whom I loved. And she remembered with disgust what she called that love, and the clearness with which she now saw her own life, as well as the lives of others, delighted her. Thus am I, and Pyotr, and the coachman, Fyodor, and that merchant, and all people from here to the Volga, wherever these remarks are applicable, and everywhere and always, she thought, as the carriage stopped in front of the low-roofed station of the Nizhny Novgorod railway, and the porters came hurrying out to meet her. "Shall I book you for Oberyarlovka?" asked Pyotr. She had entirely forgotten why she had come, and only by a great effort could she understand what he meant. "Yes," said she, handing him her purse, and, taking her little red bag, she got out of the carriage. As she entered the waiting room for the first-class passengers with the throng, she reviewed all the details of her situation, and the plans between which she was halting. And again hope and despair in alteration irritated the wounds in her tortured, cruelly palpitating heart. As she sat on the stelliform divan waiting for the train, she looked with aversion on the people going and coming. They were all her enemies. And thought now of how, when she reached the station, She would write to him, and what she would write, and then how at this very moment he, not thinking of her suffering, was complaining to his mother of his position, and how she would go to his room, and what she would say to him. The thought that she might yet live happily crossed her brain, and how hard it was to love and hate him at the same time, and, above all, how frightfully her heart was beating. End of chapter 30. Part 7, Chapter 31 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. A bell sounded, and some impudent young men, ugly and vulgar, and yet mindful of the impression that they produced, hurried before her. Then Pyotr, in his livery and top boots, with his dull, good-natured face, crossed the waiting-room, and came up to escort her to the carriage. The noisy men about the door stopped talking while she passed out on the platform. Then one of them whispered to his neighbor some remark which was apparently impudent. Anna mounted the high steps and sat down alone in the compartment on the dirty sofa which had once been white, and laid her bag beside her on the springy seat. Pyotr, at the window, raised his gold-laced hat, with an inane smile, for a farewell, and departed. The saucy conductor shut the door. A woman, deformed and ridiculously dressed up, followed by a little girl laughing affectedly, passed below the carriage window. Anna looked at her with disgust. "Katerina Andreyevna has everything, ma tante," screamed the little girl. "That child, even she is grotesque, and makes grimaces," thought Anna, and she seated herself at the opposite window of the empty apartment, to avoid seeing the people. A dirty hunchback muzhik passed close to the window, and examined the car wheels. He wore a cap, from beneath which could be seen tufts of dishevelled hair. "There is something familiar about that humpbacked muzhik," thought Anna, and suddenly she remembered her nightmare, and drew back, trembling with fright, toward the carriage door, which the conductor was just opening to admit a lady and a gentleman. "Do you want to get out?" Anna did not answer, and under her veil the conductor and the passenger did not see the horror in her face. She returned to her corner and sat down again. The couple took seats opposite her, and cast stealthy but curious glances at her gown. The husband and wife were obnoxious to her. The husband asked her if she objected to smoking. Evidently not for the sake of smoking, but as an excuse for entering into conversation with her. Having obtained her permission, he remarked to his wife in French that he felt even more inclined to talk than to smoke. They exchanged stupid remarks, with the hope of attracting Anna's attention. Anna clearly saw how they bored each other, how they hated each other. It was impossible not to hate such painful monstrosities. The second gong sounded, and was followed by the rumble of baggage, noise, shouts, laughter. Anna saw so clearly that there was nothing to rejoice at, that this laughter roused her indignation, and she longed to stop her ears so as not to hear it. At last the third signal was given. The locomotive whistled. There was a sound of escaping steam. The train started, and the gentleman crossed himself. "It would be interesting to ask him what he meant by that," thought Anna, looking at him angrily. Then she looked past the woman's head, out of the car window, at the people apparently moving backward, even while they were standing and walking on the platform. The carriage in which Anna sat moved past the stone walls of the station, the switches, the other carriages. The wheels with a ringing sound moved more easily and smoothly over the rails. The rays of the setting sun slanted into the car window, and a light breeze played through the slats of the blinds in the carriages, and Anna forgot her neighbors, breathed in the fresh air, and took up again the course of her thoughts. There, what was I thinking about? Oh, yes. I was just deciding that I could not imagine any situation in which my life could be anything but one long misery. We are all dedicated to unhappiness. We all know it, and only seek for ways to deceive ourselves. But when we see truth, what is to be done? "Reason was given to man that he might avoid what annoys him," remarked the woman, in French, apparently delighted with her sentence, and putting out her tongue. The words fitted in with Anna's thought. "To avoid what annoys him," she repeated, and a glance at the red-faced man and his thin companion showed her that the woman looked on herself as a misunderstood creature, and that her stout husband did not contradict this opinion, and took advantage of it to deceive her. Anna, as it were, read their history, and looked into the most secret depths of their hearts, but it was not interesting, and she went on with her reflections. "Yes, it annoys me very much, and reason was given to avoid it. Therefore it must be done. Why not extinguish the light when it shines on things disgusting to see? But how? Why does the conductor keep hurrying through the car? Why do the young people in this carriage scream so loud? Why do they speak? What are they laughing at? It is all false, all a lie, all deception, all vanity and vexation." When the train reached the station, Anna went out with the other passengers and, with the idea of avoiding too rude a contact with the bustling crowd, she hesitated on the platform, trying to recollect why she had come, and what she meant to do. All that seemed to her possible before to do, now seemed to her difficult to execute, especially amid this noisy crowd, which would not leave her in peace. Now the porters came to her to offer her their services. Now some young men, clattering with their heels up and down the platform, and talking loud, observed her curiously, and now hurrying passengers pushed her aside. Finally, remembering that she was proposing to go farther if there was no answer from Vronsky, she stopped an official and asked him if a coachman had been there with a letter for Count Vronsky. "Count Vronsky? Just now someone was here. Princess Sorokin and her daughter met him. What kind of a looking man is this coachman?" Even while she was talking with the official, the coachman, Mikhail, rosy and gay in his elegant blue livery and watch chain, immensely proud that he had fulfilled his commission so well, came to her and handed her a note. Anna broke the seal, and her heart stood still, even before she had read the carelessly written lines. "I am very sorry that your note did not find me in Moscow. I shall return at 10 o'clock." "Yes, that is what I expected," she said to herself, with an angry grimace. "Very good. You may go home," she said to Mikhail. She spoke the words slowly and gently, because the tumultuous beating of her heart almost prevented her from breathing. "No, I will not let you make me suffer so," thought she, addressing, with a threat, neither Vronsky nor her own self, so much as the thought that was torturing her. And she moved along the platform, past the station. 2 chambermaids walking on the platform turned to look at her, and made audible remarks about her toilet. "She has genuine lace," they said. The young men would not leave her in peace. They stared at her, and passed her again and again, joking and talking with loud voices. The station master came to her and asked if she was going to take the train. A lad selling kvass did not take his eyes from her. "Bozhe moi, where shall I go?" she said to herself, as she walked farther and farther along the platform. When she reached the end of it she stopped. Some women and children, who had come to the station to meet a man in spectacles, were talking and laughing. They too stopped talking, and turned to see Anna pass by. She hastened her steps, and reached the very limit of the platform. A freight train was coming. The platform shook and made her feel as if she were on a moving train. Suddenly she remembered the man who was run over on the day when she met Vronsky for the first time, and she knew what was left for her to do. With light and swift steps she descended the stairway which led from the water tank at the end of the platform down to the rails, and stood very near the train, which was slowly passing by. She looked under the cars, at the chains and the brake, and at the high iron wheels of the first car, and she tried to estimate with her eye the distance between the fore and the back wheels, and the moment when the middle would be in front of her. "There," she said, looking at the shadow of the car thrown up on the black coal dust which covered the sleepers. "There, in the center. He will be punished, and I shall be delivered from it all, and from myself." She was going to throw herself under the first car as its center came opposite where she stood. Her little red traveling bag caused her to lose the moment. She could not detach it from her arm. She awaited the second. A feeling like that she had experienced once, just before taking a dive in the river, came over her, and she made the sign of the cross. This familiar gesture called back to her soul a whole series of memories of her youth and childhood, and suddenly the darkness which hid everything from her was torn asunder. Life, with its elusive joys, glowed for an instant before her. But she did not take her eyes from the car, and when the centre, between the two wheels, appeared, she threw away her red bag, drawing her head between her shoulders and, with outstretched hands, threw herself on her knees under the car. For a second she was horror-struck at what she was doing. "Where am I? What am I doing? Why?" She tried to get up, to draw back, but something monstrous, inflexible struck her head and threw her on her back. "Lord, forgive me all," she murmured, feeling the struggle to be in vain. A little music was working on the railroad, mumbling in his beard. And the candle, by which she had read the book that was filled with fears, with deceptions, with anguish, and with evil, flared up with greater brightness than she had ever known, revealing to her all that was before in darkness, then flickered, grew faint, and went out forever. End of chapter 31, and end of part 7 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. Part 8, Chapter 1 of Anna Karenina. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. Part 8, Chapter 1. Almost 2 months had passed by. Half the hot summer was gone, but Sergey Ivanovitch had only just made up his mind to leave Moscow. An important event for him had just occurred. The year before he had finished his book entitled An Essay on the Principles and Forms of Government in Europe and in Russia, the fruit of 6 years of labor. The introduction, as well as some fragments from the book, had already appeared in the reviews, and certain parts had been read by the author to the people of his circle, so that the ideas contained in this treatise could not be a perfect novelty for the public. But nevertheless Sergey Ivanovitch expected that the book on its appearance would attract serious attention, and produce, if not a revolution in science, at least a powerful sensation in the learned world. This book, after careful revision, had been published the year before, and distributed among the booksellers. Though Sergey Ivanovitch answered reluctantly and with pretended indifference the questions of his friends who asked how the book was going, and though he refrained from inquiring of the booksellers how it was selling, nevertheless he followed eagerly and with strained attention every sign of the impression which his book was producing on society and literature. But a week passed, a second, a third, and there was not a sign of any impression. His friends, specialists and savants, evidently out of politeness, spoke to him about it, but the rest of his acquaintances, not being interested in a book of scientific purport, did not speak about it at all. Society, also, which just at that time was preoccupied with entirely different matters, showed utter unconcern. In literary circles, also, during the lapse of a month, there was not a word about his book. Sergey Ivanovitch carefully calculated the time necessary for preparing critical reviews, but months passed by, and there also was absolute silence. Only in the Northern Beetle, in a facetious feuilleton regarding the singer Drabanti, who had lost his voice, a few scornful words were said in regard to Kosnuishev's book, showing that it had already been criticized by all and was given over to universal ridicule. At length, after 3 months, a critical article appeared in a journal of importance. Sergey Ivanovitch knew who the author was. He had met him once at Golubtsov's. He was a very young and feeble critic, very clever as a writer, but perfectly uneducated, and cowardly in his private relations. Notwithstanding Sergey Ivanovitch's contempt of the author, he began to read the article with extraordinary interest. It proved to be abominable. Evidently the critic understood the whole book just exactly as he should not have understood it, but he had so cleverly put together a section of extracts that for those who had not read the book, and apparently almost no one had read it, it was perfectly clear that the entire book, in spite of its high pretensions, was nothing but a tissue of pompous phrases, and these not always intelligible, as the critic's frequent interrogation points testified, and that the author of the work was a perfect ignoramus. And it was done in such a witty way that Sergey Ivanovitch himself could not deny the wit of it. But, after all, it was abominable. Sergey Ivanovitch, in spite of the unusual conscientiousness with which he examined into the justice of these remarks, did not for a moment think of answering the ridiculous errors and blunders. But he could not help instantly remembering all the least details of his meeting and conversation with the author of the article. "Did I say anything to affront him?" said Sergey Ivanovitch. And remembering how, when he met the young author of the article, he had shown up his ignorance in conversation, he, therefore, understood the animus of the criticism. The appearance of this article was followed by a silence, unbroken by either voice or journal, and Sergey Ivanovitch saw that his 6 years' labor, into which he had put so much of his heart and soul, had been wasted. And his position was made all the more trying because, now that his book was off his hands, he had nothing especial to occupy the larger part of his time. He was bright, well educated, in perfect health, and very active, and he did not know how to employ his industry. Conversations with callers, visits to the club, and the meetings of committees, where there was a chance for him to talk, took some of his time. But he, a man long wonted to life in the city, did not permit himself to talk with every one, as his inexperienced brother did when he was in Moscow, so that he had much leisure and a superfluity of intellectual energy. To his joy, just at this time, which was so trying to him because of the failure of his book, and after his interest in dissenters, American subjects, the famine in Samara, expositions, spiritualism, was exhausted, the Slavic question began to engross public attention, and Sergey Ivanovitch, who had been one of its earliest advocates, gave himself up to it with enthusiasm. Among Sergey Ivanovitch's friends nothing else was thought about or talked about except the Serbian war. All the things that lazy people are accustomed to do was done for the help of these brother Slavs. Balls, concerts, dinners, matches, ladies' finery, beer, drinking saloons, everything bore witness of sympathy for the Slavs. With much that was said and written on this subject, Sergey Ivanovitch could not agree. He saw that the Slav question was one of those fashionable movements that always carry people to extremes. He saw that many people with very petty personal ends in view took part in it. He recognized that the newspapers made many useless and exaggerated statements in order to attract attention to themselves and belittle their rivals. He saw that in this common impulse of society, upstarts put themselves forward and outdid one another in making a noise. Commanders-in-chief without an army, ministers without a ministry, journalists without a journal, party leaders without partisans. He saw much that was childish and absurd. But he also saw and admired the enthusiasm which united all classes, and which it was impossible not to share. The massacre of the Serbians, who professed the same faith and spoke almost the same language, aroused sympathy for their sufferings and indignation against their persecutors. And the heroism of the Serbs and Montenegrins, who were fighting for a great cause, aroused a universal desire to help their brethren, not only in word, but in deed. But there was another phenomenon which delighted Sergey Ivanovitch especially. This was the manifestation of public opinion. Society actually spoke out its desires. The national soul received expression, as Sergey Ivanovitch expressed it, and the more he studied this movement as a whole, the more evidently it seemed to him that it was destined to grow to enormous proportions and to constitute an epoch. He devoted himself to the service of this great cause and forgot to think about his book. All his time was now so occupied that he could scarcely reply to the letters and demands made upon him. He had worked all the spring and a part of the summer, and only in the month of July could he tear himself away to go to his brother in the country. He went for a fortnight's vacation, and rejoiced to find even in the depths of the country, in the very holy of holies of the peasantry, the same awakening of the national spirit in which he himself and all the inhabitants of the capital and the large cities of the empire firmly believed. Katavasov seized the opportunity to fulfill a promise he had made to visit Levin, and the two friends left town together. End of chapter 1. Part 8, Chapter 2 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Sergey Ivanovitch and Katavasov had just reached the station of the Kursk railway, which was especially crowded that day, and, leaving their carriage, they were looking at a lackey who had followed them laden with various articles, when 4 cabs filled with volunteers also drove up. Ladies carrying bouquets met them, and accompanied by a crowd, they entered the station. One of the ladies who had come to meet the volunteers came out of the waiting room and addressed Sergey Ivanovitch. "Did you also come to see them off?" she asked, speaking in French. "No, I am going myself, Princess, to have a little rest at my brother's. But are you still on escort duty?" he added, with a scarcely perceptible smile of amusement. "I have to be," replied the princess. "But tell me, is it true that we have sent off 800 already? Malvinsky told me so." "More than 800. We've sent off more than 1,000. If we could count those not immediately from Moscow," said Sergey Ivanovitch. "There, I said so!" cried the lady, delighted. "And is it true that the subscriptions amount to nearly 1,000,000? "More than that, Princess." "Have you read the news? They have beaten the Turks again." "Yes, I read about it," replied Sergey Ivanovitch. She referred to a recent dispatch, which confirmed the report that 3 days before the Turks had been beaten at every point and had fled, and that the next day a decisive battle was expected. "Oh, by the way, do you know a splendid young fellow is petitioning to go? I don't see why they put obstacles in his way. I wanted to ask you to put your signature on his petition. I know him. He comes from the Countess Lidia Ivanovna." After asking some particulars in regard to the young man, Sergey Ivanovitch went into the waiting room, affixed his signature to the document, and handed it back to the princess. "Do you know, Count Vronsky, the famous, is going on this train?" said the princess, with a triumphant and significant smile, as he rejoined her and handed her the petition. "I heard that he was going, but I did not know when. On this train?" "I just saw him. He is here. His mother is the only one with him. All things considered, I do not think he could do any better." "Oh, yes, of course." During the conversation the crowd had rushed into the restaurant of the station, where a man with a glass in his hand was making an address to the volunteers. "For the service of our faith and humanity and our brethren," he said, raising his voice, "Matushka Moskva, Mother Moscow, gives you her blessing in this noble cause. May it prosper," he concluded, with tears in his eyes. The crowd responded with cheers, and a fresh throng poured into the waiting room, nearly overwhelming the princess. "Ah, princess, what do you say to this?" cried Stepan Arkadyevitch, who, with a radiant smile of joy, suddenly appeared in the midst of the throng. "Didn't he speak gloriously? Bravo! And here's Sergey Ivanovitch. You ought to speak just a few words, you know, of encouragement. You do it so well," added Oblonsky, touching Koznishev's arm with an expression of suave, flattering deference. "Oh, no, I am leaving immediately." "Where?" "To the country, to my brother's," replied Sergey Ivanovitch. "Then you'll see my wife. I've written her, but you'll see her before she gets my letter. Please tell her that you met me, and that everything is all right. She will understand. And be so good as to tell her, too, that I got my place as a member of the commission of... Well, she knows what that is. You know, les petites misères de la vie humaine," said he, turning to the princess, as if in apology. "My Kaya, not Lisa, but Bipshy, sends 1,000 guns and 12 hospital nurses. Did I tell you?" "Yes, I heard about it," answered Koznishев coldly. "But what a pity you are going away," replied Stepan Arkadyevitch. "We give a farewell dinner tomorrow to 2 volunteers, at Daimer's. Bartnietsky of Petersburg, and our Veslovsky, Grisha. Both are going. Veslovsky is just married. He is a fine lad. Isn't it so, princess?" he added, addressing the lady. The princess did not reply, but looked at Kozneushef. The fact that the princess and Sergey Ivanovitch evidently wanted to get rid of him did not in the least disconcert Stepan Arkadyevitch. Smiling, he glanced now at the princess's hat plume, now off to one side or the other as if searching for a new subject, and, as he saw a lady going by with a subscription box, he beckoned to her and handed her a 5-ruble note. "I can't bear to see the subscription boxes pass by me, now that I have ready money," he said. "What splendid news there is! Hurrah for the Montenegrins!" "What is that you say?" he cried, when the princess told him that Vronsky was going by the first train. For an instant Stepan Arkadyevitch's face grew sad, but the next moment, slightly limping with both feet, and stroking his side whiskers, he went off to the room where Vronsky was. He had already entirely forgotten the tears he had shed over his sister's grave, and saw in Vronsky only a hero and an old friend. "One must do him justice, in spite of his faults," said the princess to Sergey Ivanovitch, when Oblonsky was gone. "He has the true Russian, the Slavic nature. But I am afraid it will be disagreeable to the count to see him. Whatever people may say, I pity that unhappy man. Try to talk with him a little on the journey," said the princess. "Certainly, if I have a chance." "I never liked him, but what he is doing now makes up for much. He's not only going himself, but he's taking out a squadron of cavalry at his own expense." "Yes, so I have heard." The bell rang, and the crowd pressed toward the doors. "There he is," said the princess, pointing out Vronsky, who was dressed in a long coat and broad-brimmed black hat. His mother was leaning on his arm. Oblonsky followed them, talking vivaciously. Vronsky was frowning and looked straight ahead, as if not listening to what Stepan Arkadyevitch said. Apparently at Oblonsky's suggestion he looked in the direction where Sergey Ivanovitch and the princess were standing, and raised his hat silently. His face, which had grown old and worn, was like stone. Going out on the platform, Vronsky, silently quitting his mother's side, vanished from sight in his compartment. On the platform men were singing the national hymn. Then hurrahs and vivas resounded. One of the volunteers, a tall, very young man, with stooping shoulders, ostentatiously responded to the public, waving above his head a felt hat and a bouquet, while behind him 2 officers and an elderly man with a full beard and a greasy cap put out their heads, also bowing. End of chapter 2. Part 8, Chapter 3 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. After Sergey Ivanovitch had taken leave of the princess, he and Katavasov, who had joined him, entered their carriage, which was packed, and the train started. When the train rolled into the station at Tsaritsino, it was met by a chorus of young men singing the Slavsa. Again the volunteers put out their heads and bowed, but Sergey Ivanovitch paid no attention to them. He had had so much to do with volunteers that he already knew this general type, and it did not interest him. But Katavasov, who on account of his pedagogical occupations had not enjoyed any opportunity to observe the men who volunteered, was very much interested, and asked his friend about them. Sergey Ivanovitch advised him to look into their carriage and talk with some of them. At the next station Katavasov followed this advice. As soon as the train stopped, he went into the second-class carriage and made the acquaintance of the volunteers. Some of them were seated in a corner of the carriage, talking noisily, aware that they were attracting the attention of the other passengers and of Katavasov, whom they saw come in. The tall, sunken-chested young man was talking louder than the others. He was evidently tipsy, and was telling the story of something which had happened in their establishment. Opposite him sat an old officer in the Austrian military jacket of the Guard uniform. He was listening with a smile to the narrator, and occasionally prompting him. A third volunteer, in an artillery uniform, was sitting on a box near them. A fourth was asleep. Katavasov entered into conversation with the youth, and learned that he had been a rich merchant in Moscow, who, before he was 22 years old, had succeeded in squandering a considerable fortune. Katavasov did not like him, because he was effeminate, conceited, and sickly. He evidently felt, especially now that he was drunk, that he was doing a heroic deed, and he boasted in the most disagreeable manner. The second, a retired officer, also impressed Katavasov unpleasantly. He was a man who had apparently tried his hand at everything. He had worked on a railway, and had been director of an estate, and had established a factory, and he talked of everything without any necessity of doing so, and often used words which showed his ignorance. The third, the artilleryman, on the contrary, pleased Katavasov very much. He was a modest gentleman. He was evidently disgusted by the affected knowledge of the retired officer and the young merchant's boasted heroism, and he would say nothing about himself. When Katavasov asked him what induced him to go into Serbia, he answered modestly, "I am going because everyone else is going. We must help the Serbians. It is too bad." "They have very few of our artillerymen, I believe." "My service in the artillery was very short. I may be assigned to the infantry or the cavalry." "Why in the infantry, when they need artillerymen more than all?" asked Katavasov, gathering from the artillerist's age that he must have already reached a considerable rank. "I did not serve very long in the artillery, but left the service when I was only a yunker." And he began to explain why he had not passed his examination. All this together produced on Katavasov a generally unpleasant impression, and when the volunteers rushed out into one of the stations to get something to drink, Katavasov felt the desire to talk with someone so as to confirm his unfavorable impression. One of his fellow travelers, a little old man in a military paletot, had been listening all the time to Katavasov's talk with the volunteers. As the two were left alone together in the carriage, Katavasov addressed him. "What a diversity of condition of all these men that are going south," said Katavasov, vaguely, wishing to express his opinion and at the same time draw out the old man's views. The old man was a soldier who had fought in 2 campaigns, and he knew what it meant to go to war. And in the actions and words of these gentlemen, the bravery with which they kept applying themselves to the flask, he read their inferiority as soldiers. Moreover, his residence was in a district city, and he wanted to relate how from that place a good-for-nothing fellow, a drunkard and a thief whom no one would hire as a workman, had gone as a soldier. But knowing by experience that in the present state of excitement under which society was laboring, it was dangerous to express himself frankly against the general sentiment, and especially to criticize the volunteers, he merely looked at Katavasov. "Well, men are needed there," said he, smiling with his eyes. And they began to talk over the latest war news, and each of them concealed from the other his doubt whether a battle was to be expected on the next day, since, according to the latest report, the Turks had been defeated at all points. And so they parted without either of them having expressed what he really thought. When Katavasov returned to his own carriage, he told Sergey Ivanovitch, with some twinges of conscience, that he enjoyed talking with the volunteers, and he declared that they were excellent lads. In the great station where they next stopped, the chorus, the cheers, the bouquets, and the beggars again appeared, and again the ladies with bouquets conducted the volunteers into the restaurant, but there was so much less enthusiasm than there had been at Moscow. Chapter 4. Part 8, Chapter 4 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. While the train stopped at a certain government capital, Sergey Ivanovitch did not go to the restaurant, but walked up and down the platform. The first time he passed Vronsky's compartment, he noticed that the window was shaded. But, when he passed the second time, he saw the old countess at the window. She called him to her. "You see, I am going as far as Kursk with him." "Yes, I heard that he was going," answered Koznuishev, stopping at the window and looking in. "What a noble action on his part," he added, seeing that Vronsky was not in the carriage. "Well, what could he do after his misfortune?" "What a horrible thing it was," said Sergey Ivanovitch. "Ach, what I have not been through! Yes, Do come in. Ah, what I have not been through," she repeated, as Sergey Ivanovitch came in and sat down on the seat beside her. "You could not imagine it. For 6 weeks he never said a word to any one, and he only ate when I begged him to do so. We dared not leave him alone a single instant. We took away everything with which he might kill himself with. We lived on the first floor, but we had to be on the watch all the same. You know he shot himself once before, for her sake," said the old countess, her face clouding at this remembrance. "Yes, she died as was fit for such a woman to die. Even the death she chose was low and wretched." "It is not for us to judge her, countess," replied Sergey Ivanovitch with a sigh. "But I can imagine what you have suffered." "Ah, don't speak of it. My son was with me at my country place. A note was brought him. He answered immediately. We did not know at all that she was at the station. That evening I had just gone to my room, and my Mary told me that a lady had thrown herself under the train. I felt something like a shock. I understood instantly what had happened. I knew it was she. My first words were, 'Let no one tell the count.' But they had just told him. His coachman was at the station when it happened, and saw it all. I ran to my son's room. He was beside himself. It was terrible to see him. Without speaking one word, he left the house. And what he found, I do not know. But they brought him back like one dead. I should never have known him. Prostration complete, the doctor said. Then he became almost insane. Oh, what can be said?" cried the countess, waving her hands. "It was a terrible time. No, let people say what they will. She was a bad woman. Think! What a desperate passion she was in. She did it to make an extraordinary sensation, and she succeeded. She has done irreparable injury to the lives of 2 men of rare merit, her husband and my son, and ruined herself." "How about her husband?" "He has taken her little girl. At first Alyosha consented to everything. Now he is awfully sorry, having given up his daughter to a stranger, but he could not take back his word. Karenina went to the funeral. We succeeded in preventing a meeting between him and Alyosha. For him, that is her husband, this death is a deliverance. But my poor son gave up everything for her, sacrificed everything. Me, his position, his career. And she was not contented with that, but wanted to ruin him besides. No, whatever you may say, her death is the death of a bad woman, a woman without religion. May God forgive me, but when I think of the harm she has done my son, I cannot help cursing her memory." "How is he now?" "This Serbian war is our salvation. I am old and don't understand much about it, but God sent it for him. Of course, for me, as his mother, it is painful. And besides, they say, 'Ce n'est pas très bien vu à Petersburg.' But what can be done about it? This is the only thing that could save him. Yashvin, his friend, gambled away all he had and enlisted. He came to Alyosha and persuaded him to go to Serbia with him. Now this is occupying him. Do talk with him, I beg of you. He is so sad. And then, besides his other troubles, he has a toothache. But he will be glad to see you. Please talk with him. He is walking up and down on the other side of the track." Sergey Ivanovitch said that he would be very glad to talk with the count, and went over to the side where Vronsky was. Chapter 5 Part 8, Chapter 5 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. In the oblique evening shadow cast by a heap of baggage piled on the platform, Vronsky, in his long paletot and slouch hat, with his hands in his pockets, was walking, like a wild beast in a cage, up and down a narrow space where he could not take more than a score of steps. It seemed to Sergey Ivanovitch as he drew near that Vronsky saw him but pretended not to recognize him. But to Sergey Ivanovitch this was all the same. He was above any petty susceptibility. At this moment, Vronsky, in his eyes, was an important actor in a grand event, and deserved to be sustained and encouraged. He approached the count. Vronsky stopped, looked at him, recognized him, and taking a few steps to meet him, cordially held out his hand. "Perhaps you would prefer not to see me," said Sergey Ivanovitch. "But can I be of any service to you?" "No one could be less unpleasant for me to meet than you," answered Vronsky. "Pardon me. There is nothing pleasant for me in life." "I understand, and I want to offer you my services," said Kozneushchev, struck by the deep suffering that was apparent in the count's face. "Might not a letter to Restich or Milan be of some use to you?" "Oh, no," answered Vronsky, making an effort to understand. "If it is all the same to you, we will walk a little. It is so stifling in the train. A letter? No, thank you. One needs no letter of introduction to get killed. In this case, one to the Turks, perhaps," added he, with a smile at the corners of his mouth. His eyes kept the same expression of bitter sadness. "Well, it would make it easier for you to come into relations with men prepared for action. Still, as you please. But I was very glad to learn of your decision. The very fact that a man of your standing has joined the volunteers will raise them above all cavil in the public estimation." "My sole merit," replied Vronsky, "is that life is of no value to me. As to physical energy, I know it will not be wanting for any purpose, and I am glad enough to give my life, which is not only useless to me, but disgusting, to be useful to somebody." And he made an impatient motion with his jaw, caused by his unceasing toothache, which prevented him from talking with the expression he desired. "You will be regenerated, it is my prediction," said Sergey Ivanovitch, feeling touched. "The deliverance of one's oppressed brethren is an aim for which one might well live as die. May God grant you full success and fill your soul with peace," he added, and held out his hand. Vronsky pressed his hand cordially. "As a field piece I may be of use. But as a man, I am only a ruin," murmured the count, with intervals between the phrases. The throbbing pain in his tooth, which filled his mouth with saliva, made it an effort for him to speak. He stopped and fixed his eyes mechanically on the engine wheels, which advanced, revolving slowly and smoothly on the rails. And suddenly a sense of intense spiritual anguish caused him for a moment to forget his toothache. At the sight of the engine and the rails, through the influence of his talk with an acquaintance with whom he had not seen since his misfortune, she suddenly appeared to him, or, at least, that which remained of her, as, when he rushed like a madman into the barracks near the station where they had carried her, he saw, lying on a table, shamelessly exposed to the sight of all, her bleeding body, which had so lately been full of life. Her head was uninjured, with its heavy braids and its light curls clustering around the temples, was leaning back with the eyes half closed, and in the lovely face hovered still a strange, wild expression, while her rosy lips, slightly opened, seemed prepared to utter once again that terrible menace, to predict to him, as she had in their dispute, that he would repent. And he tried to remember how she looked when he first met her, also at a railroad station, with that mysterious, poetic, charming beauty, overflowing with life and gaiety, demanding and bestowing happiness, and not bitterly revengeful as he remembered her at their last interview. He tried to remember the happy moments he had spent with her, but these moments were forever spoiled for him. He remembered only her face, haughtily expressing her threat of unnecessary, but implacable, vengeance. He ceased to be conscious of his toothache, and sobs convulsed his face. After walking up and down by the baggage once or twice, the count controlled himself and spoke calmly with Sergey Ivanovitch. "Have you seen the latest telegrams?" "Yes, they have fought 3 times, and another battle is expected tomorrow." And after a few words about King Milan's proclamation, and the immense effect which it might have, the two men separated at the ringing of the second bell and went to their respective compartments. End of chapter 5.